So we're going to be going into a series, and it's called The Rest of the Story. You got 2 puns today. The series we're starting is called The Rest of the Story. The title is Give It a Rest. Can you guess what we're talking about? We're talking about rest. We're talking about Sabbath. We're talking about slowing down. How important it is that when we're pursuing things, when we're saying yes to things, we can't just be in this cycle where we're stuck in constant busyness because we're spread so thin and always rushing to the next thing. We want to be people who know how to press in and to go after what God's calling us, but also follow the biblical principles of being still, of stopping, of leaving space, of having margin. We look at the life of Jesus, and he wasn't just constantly rushing to the next thing. There were actually plenty of moments where people wanted him to rush to something, even to the point of people's lives being on the line, yet he didn't rush. Think about that for a moment. There are 2 times I can think of off the top of my head where people's lives were on the line, and Jesus did not rush to get there. He led the most effective ministry of all time, of all humanity. He led this ministry that was the most fruitful. And yet he constantly was present where he was at. He didn't rush. He engaged with what God was doing. He talks about, Jesus says, I only speak what the Father's given me to speak. I do what I see him doing. And this is an area that in our society, I believe we need to learn and grow in, starting with myself. I get to share today of what God's been doing in my life over really what began a year ago, and especially in the last 6 months. And we're going to talk about what the problem is in the culture of busyness that we live in, but then also the solutions that God already gave us in his word thousands of years before now. And I can tell you from personal experience that by being intentional with my yes and with my no, by being intentional with Sabbath, by being intentional with times of stopping and being still, it has led in my heart to being more fruitful, more joyful, more effective in so many ways. I wouldn't go back. I'm the type of person that if you talked to me 2 or 3 years ago, not only did I not stop to read a lot of books other than the Bible, but then I got onto Audible, and I started listening to books, which is great. I have no problem with Audible. But I would listen to it on double speed so that I could get through it faster. Then someone told me about this app called the Blink List, which is summaries of books. So I'm like, what's better than twice the speed on Audible is a summary. This is perfect. And then I go and I get Blink List, and then I find out they do double speed. So I can listen to a double speed summary of a book instead of sitting and reading it. And it's part of, I'll be honest, there are aspects that are part of my nature. I love to be fully invested in something. I love to go after things. God's given me passions, but when that's not cultivated well, it can become just rushing into everything. And God's been doing a work in me personally that I just get to share as we go and dive into Scripture of, man, what a blessing it is to do it the way that God shows us to do it. To actually have this rhythm where we go in and we're stretched and there's challenges and God calls us out in faith, but there's also a regular rhythm of stepping back and stopping and making space, abiding. It's a powerful thing. I used to be a strength coach, and at GCU, we would educate our athletes. There were some athletes that just wanted to work out all the time. Literally, they hated days off. They didn't want to stop. They always wanted to be in the gym. Now, granted, there were also athletes that never wanted to be in the gym. They always tried to get out of it, or they always tried to make an excuse, or they were always whatever. But some of these athletes that always wanted to be in the gym, we would have to educate them, and we'd say, you're not actually getting stronger in the gym. Actually, technically, you're getting weaker. You're breaking down your muscles. You're using your body in a capacity that's actually exhausting your resources and your capacity, your strength. You're breaking down your muscles. You're getting stronger when you're resting. That's when your muscles rebuild. Now, granted, it'd be nice if you could just rest and get stronger all the time, but it's a package deal. You push yourself farther than you've been before, and then you stop and you allow for there to be a rebuilding, a restoration. Both are necessary. In the world today, the science world, the exercise science world has caught up on this the last 20 years, and so now millions of dollars are being spent on how do we help our athletes recover? How do we help them rebuild after they've exerted in the gym, in a game, or whatever it might be? How do we sustain their bodies? Incredible things, and I love the science behind it. I used to have a friend at the time when I was at GCU who was the strength coach for the San Francisco Giants, and they would pay to outfit their locker room with red lighting because red light helps downshift when you're full of adrenaline and you've just come off a game. They need to downshift their players so that they're preparing their bodies to rest because they've got another game in a couple days or they're jumping on a plane soon. They do all kinds of nutritional stuff. My friend in the locker room, he'd have tart cherry juice because there were natural forms of melatonin that they would try and say, hey, you've been in a stadium, there's been lights, there's been adrenaline, there's probably been a rush, and now we need to help you downshift so you can recover, so you can rebuild, so you can re-strengthen, so you're ready for the next time that you're on the field. There's all kinds of science behind sleep and helping support sleep, neuroscience, helping support your nervous system, nutrition, all the things. But there's a difference between what we would call active rest and static rest. We'll talk about this more in a second, but active rest is when you're actually engaged in the process of your recovery. Static rest is, man, I just got done with a crazy workout and I'm not going to stretch, I'm not going to sleep, I'm just going to go home and eat a bag of Cheetos. I'm resting statically, but I'm not actively participating in my recovery. That'll actually slow your recovery, or it'll leave you in a worse place when you go to exert yourself again, right? So we're going to talk about some of these things in the context of our spiritual walk, not just our bodies. But before we open up, we're going to be in Deuteronomy again this week. I know we were in Deuteronomy last week. We're going to be in Deuteronomy 5. But just to set the stage for a couple of these things, there's a difference between rest, treatment, and rehab. Rest, treatment, and rehab. Rest is ideally what you're doing so that you don't get hurt. If you're training properly, if you have a balanced workout program and practice schedule and all these things, and you're resting properly along the way, it's going to reduce the likelihood that you get injured. Because as a strength coach, you're not only in charge of your athletes getting more conditioned and stronger, but you're also held accountable. If a bunch of your athletes start getting injured, that probably means there's a common denominator, and that could be you. Now, there's some times where athlete could get injured, and it has nothing to do with their training program, and it has nothing to do with their rest, but it's just a physical, circumstantial moment that's out of your control. But if I'm a strength coach, and all of a sudden 5 of my athletes have similar injuries, I better be looking at what I'm doing and how I'm training them because something is underlying what's going on. Could be. So rest lets your body rejuvenate so that you're stronger and ready for the next engagement before injury. Now, if there is an injury, whether that's due to overexertion or just a freak accident on the field, then there's a difference between treatment and rehab. If you look at the way they would operate in the NFL 40 years ago, athletes would have some of the craziest stuff happen to them in games, and they would give them the craziest stuff to get them through the game. Like stuff to suppress the pain, or guys would be like severely concussed and they give them sniffing salts to wake them back up so they could go. That you could categorize as treatment. You're not actually fixing the problem. You're just getting a dose of something that'll get you through. And then you'll probably be better or worse off tomorrow. Rehab involves partnership. There's not a quick fix, but rehab is saying, hey, I'm going to walk through the necessary steps in partnership with my medical counsel, and I'm going to restore the wound that I endured. So differences, treatment versus rehab. The outcome is that when we're resting, we come back stronger. if we just look for a patch or a treatment that'll get us to tomorrow, we actually slowly get worse and worse. And if we rehab, we can get fully restored. Now, we talk about this a lot as a church. How do we actually lead people into true healing? It actually involves a lot more work. It's not just sniffing salts. It's not just something that's going to block the pain from getting to your nervous system. But rehab takes partnership. Oftentimes, a victim spirit will just want the treatment, and they just want to keep getting the treatment, and they want someone to just keep doing it for them. But if we're looking for rehab, if we're looking for true restoration and healing, it's actually a partnership of rehab. And it requires some work on both sides. There are times in necessary rehab, there's someone coming alongside you and saying, hey, I've walked people through this before, and that's a powerful thing. But it also means, hey, there's a process. Lynn just had a surgery. She was going through rehab, and it's a process. It's not an easy journey to go for the full restoration. You're partnering, but there's work involved. If an athlete has bad nutrition, no sleep, unnecessary load or baggage or whatever, they won't perform that well, for one, and they won't get stronger. They'll actually step into this vicious cycle that'll make them weaker or more tired or eventually burn out or get injured. So in our society, if we step back a level, in our society, we tend to not be very good at resting as well. What we're going to do today is we're going to identify the problem of being too busy, as well as the need for rest. And then next week, we're going to go a level deeper and talk about how does it actually look to practically implement these things. But a couple quotes real quick. Corrie ten Boom. She said, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. If the devil can't make you sin, he'll make you busy. Ronald Rolheiser coined the term pathological busyness for our society. The inability not to be busy. It's almost like this picture of like a hamster wheel or a rat race where no matter you, and I'm guilty of this more than anyone probably in this room. You ever say, oh, in a month it's actually going to slow down. That's when we can meet up. In a month it's going to be way more chill. It's going to slow down. And then a month passes. Oh, man, I forgot about this, but trust me, another month from now it's going to be better. I've heard the quote before that adulting is simply thinking that in 1 month things will slow down, if you were to define it. This pathological busyness. But let's think for a second about time and just the time that we have to spend across history. So think about it. There used to be a time where there were no cars, and you either had to walk somewhere or find a horse, which takes a while if you're going to go any extended distance. Then all of a sudden, we have the invention of the car. Man, that's incredible. That's going to save us so much time walking that we're going to have all this extra time in life. But what happened? Now, all of a sudden, we've got this invention that saves us a bunch of time, but we're rushing from one place to the other and getting angry in traffic because we are so behind. What happened? The invention gave us time, but where did it go? Here's another one. People used to have to wash their laundry by hand. That takes some time and some effort. All of a sudden, boom, somebody invented a washing and drying machine. Man, this is going to save us so much time. And yet now we get home from whatever we're doing throughout the day and we look at the pile of laundry and we're like, oh, I'm so behind. I have no time to do laundry. Well, what happened to the time that was saved? People used to make food from scratch. Imagine that. Maybe we should go back to that one. And then all of a sudden we have fast food where someone will make your food and hand it to you through your car window. You think, man, I don't even have to cook anymore. I'm going to have so much time in life. And yet we're angry because there's a line at the fast food restaurant. And then we grab our bag and speed off to the next thing in the car that's keeping us from having to walk to the place that we're going, and the clothes that we didn't have to wash ourselves because we had a washing machine, but somehow someone stole all the time. Now we're to the point where we literally have a device that could tell us anything in the world and have AI interpret things for us. And then we're angry because our reception causes it to take 3 seconds to pop up on our phone. So where did all the time go? John Mark Comer said this in one of his books. He said, in the 1960s, futurists all over the world, from sci-fi writers to political theorists, thought that by now we'd all be working way fewer hours. One famous Senate subcommittee in 1967 was told that by 1985, the average American would only work 22 hours a week for 27 weeks a year. 22 hours a week for 27 weeks a year. He says everybody thought the main problem in the future would be too much leisure. So how did that pan out? What happened is we didn't slow down. Instead, we sped up by trying to force many more things in the time that we otherwise saved. Now we have smartphones, now we have social media, entertainment, video games. Trillions of dollars worth of industries have been developed to conveniently fill the time that we could have otherwise saved. Right now in human history, we have more options at our fingertips at any given moment than has ever been had in society in the past. Literally millions of options at your fingertips in any given moment. You may have heard of the rule of 10,000 hours. It's this principle about if you devote a focused 10,000 hours on anything, you can become an expert in it. So whether that's one thing or whether it's several things, in 10,000 hours you can learn several languages. In 10,000 hours you could memorize the New Testament. In 10,000 hours you could get degrees. Yet according to a study by Philip Zimbardo, his research showed that the average guy spends 10,000 hours playing video games by the age of 21. And we wonder where our time has gone. So instead of a young man being grown up to actually cultivate the gifts and the call that God has on his life and doing something meaningful and using 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything, instead of all those options, we're pursuing a Fortnite championship series. But it's not just the young people. There's another study. The average iPhone user touches their phone each day 2,617 times. See, that's why I don't have an iPhone. I'm not one of those people. It's all the iPhone people that are on their phones too much. 2,617 times. Now, across all phones and all users, the average person across all ages is on their phone 2.5 hours per day across 76 sessions. That's a lot going on in one day. For the younger generations, it was twice that. But remember, technology is never free. Even when something's given for free in technology, you're paying for it. What are you paying for it with? Your time and attention. Everybody wants that currency. Everybody wants your time. You're paying for it even if they're offering it to you freely. With infinite amounts of options at our fingertips, it changes the way our brains even function in ways that I don't even think we fully understand yet. But it leads us further down this path, this rat race of constantly being pathologically busy. I've been guilty of this. There was a time where I was watching a bunch of like YouTube shorts and reels, which at the time were all a minute or less. So it's like it's got to be quick and catchy, right? And I started realizing in real life, I would get agitated if something, like even watching movies, I was like, this movie, even if it was like an action movie, it's too slow. Like your brain starts to change because the dopamine is being expected on a minute-by-minute basis. That's not normal. It's not natural. Think of social life 100 years ago. Maybe you occasionally went to a movie. We don't have any 100-year-olds, do we? I don't think we do. Maybe occasionally went to a movie or to a restaurant. There was, I'm sure, entertainment. There's always been entertainment. Maybe you talk on the phone every once in a while, stuck to the wall. Can't take it with you. No screen. You write a letter instead of email. Maybe you traveled in some limited capacity. Probably could read a lot of books. But during that time, if someone stopped unannounced at your house, it was actually welcome. Maybe it's because they weren't so busy with stimulus going on in their brain all the time that if someone stopped by, it was like, wow, come on in. This is the highlight of my day. And we actually engaged socially, even when it was unplanned. I have this growing idea personally. I was like, what? You know, we do our prayer and fasting week and fast periodically and whatever. But I was thinking personally, I was like, what if I did a 50s fast? And I said, I'm fasting everything that someone wouldn't have had access to in the 50s. That could be from a food standpoint. That could be from a phone standpoint, a technology standpoint. I'm like, that could be a fast that could be valuable in our society. Just to slow down, just to let our brains cycle off of the constant pathological busyness. Now, I'm all for technology. I'm all for innovation, creativity. But I think there are ways that as society changes, as technology changes, we also have to grow in how we steward technology. And I'd say if you're like me, I'm just now getting around to recognizing how to steward some of this stuff. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, but we're going to dive into some aspects of it today and then continue unpacking it through the series. But let's turn to Deuteronomy 5. We're going to start in verse 12. The beauty of what we're talking about today is that this isn't a new issue. This isn't brand new, like, man, we need a brand new solution. God, what do we do? God's actually already had it written down thousands of years before this. His principles stand even if society changes. And so we're going to read about that today. Deuteronomy 5:12. It says, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. As the Lord your God commanded you, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your sons or daughters, or your male servant or your female servant, or your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So we touched on this briefly last week. God's bringing the Israelites out of slavery. They are learning how to walk as free sons and daughters rather than slaves. God's teaching them how to operate. A lot of the Torah was God teaching them how to operate as a society. Someone, a well-hearted Israelite at that time would have looked at the Torah and said, man, can you believe that God showed us the way to live? He showed us how to have life. Obviously, there are plenty of times that Israel departed from that. But sometimes in our society, we look at the Old Testament as like, oh man, God just has all these rules, and he was probably just angry back then, and now Jesus came and he chilled out a little bit. No, actually, God's love for his people burned just as hot as it does for you today. And he was saying, I'm going to disciple you as a nation to step out of the mindset of slavery and into the mindset of being my people. And one of the commandments he gives is to keep the Sabbath day holy, like we just read. And sometimes we look back and we think, well, okay, we don't, that's all Old Testament stuff. We don't really have to have a Sabbath. Or like, Jesus is my Sabbath, so rest is all the time. I think that's a funny statement when people are like, oh, Jesus is my Sabbath, my rest all the time. I'm like, you don't look very restful. I get the argument you're trying to portray, but let's be honest. And so we asked the question last week of saying, God was teaching the Israelites indirectly through this commandment to say, hey, in Egypt, slaves don't get Sabbaths. You're not a slave. Take a Sabbath. Live free. And if we today are kind of taking the badge of honor of like, oh, I'm just doing so much and I don't have time and I just want to push through, I would ask the question like I did last week, what are you enslaved to? Free men take Sabbaths. So the word Sabbath comes from the word Shabbat. It literally means to cease or to stop. Walter Brueggemann was known as saying, people who Sabbath live all 7 days differently. I maybe wouldn't have agreed a couple years ago, but I definitely agree with that statement today. If we Sabbath well, it changes how we walk through the whole week. He says 6 days you'll work and 1 day you'll rest. He's adding this natural principle, this natural rhythm of life for his people. But I find it interesting that he doesn't just say you. He says you, your sons and daughters, implying that Sabbath is actually a family ordeal, your whole family. But he doesn't just stop with sons and daughters. He talks about male and female servants. You could equate that to like your business, your company, your employees. Even animals, physically, he's like, give the animals a break. Your livestock. Even the people visiting, he talks about the sojourners. Even if people are guests in your home, it's a household ordeal. Not just a law, but it's a household, it's a family ordeal. Now, have you guys heard there's been arguments more recently that society will look at the Bible and say, well, the Bible condones slavery because of servants that are referenced. Y'all heard that? That's absurd. But this is one reason why. Just as Israelites came out and they were set free and God gave them a Sabbath, and this context of you're free men, God tells them, even with your bondservants, we don't have time to go into the historical context of a bondservant, but he's saying your bondservants get Sabbaths too. Slaves don't get Sabbaths. Your bondservants are going to be Sabbathing with you. You're not just going to become the same slave master that you walked out of. He's breaking the system, not actually duplicating it through the Israelites. But he says, remember that I brought you out of slavery. Don't fall back into that slave mentality. There's a different way of thinking when you're thinking as a free person. He's taking them along that journey. Let's turn to Exodus 20, verse 8. It says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So multiple times he refers to the Sabbath being holy. Holy means set apart. Think of the word holiday, holy day. It's a day set apart for something. So God is basically implementing this holiday every seventh day. He says, set it apart, make it holy. So if we're learning to Sabbath well, we would ask ourselves the question, does our Sabbath look different than all the other days? Or is it just one more day that we're trying to rush through the rat race to catch up on all the things we're busy with? If it's a holy day, it's set apart. Now it says it's a holy day, and it mentions in there it's a holy day to the Lord your God. We're going to talk about this more next week, but there's a difference between a day off and a Sabbath. And the difference is that it's a day, it's a holiday, it's a holy day set up apart for the Lord. Now, we mentioned that static versus active rest with athletes. In a spiritual context, you could look at that and say a day off of work could be a static recovery, a static rest. Where, yeah, you're not going to work. Maybe your day looks different. But from a spiritual standpoint, there's not active engagement in your Sabbath. So a true Sabbath involves the active recovery of saying, hey, I'm actually going to be purposeful with my Sabbath. I'm going to set a day aside. If we think about the context of a holiday, what do you do on a holiday? When you set a day aside, you're probably getting all your work, you're buttoning stuff up at work, you're taking a day off, you're getting some stuff ready. You might make some invitations. If Sabbath is a community ordeal, there might be invitations or plans you're making. But imagine if, and I'm not saying this from a workload standpoint, but imagine if once a week, the body of Christ in our families or in our context or whatever that is, had a holiday set aside for God. And not a holiday in the sense of this big party with a bunch of work or whatever, but the intentionality of saying, I'm going to arrange my week accordingly so that I'm not bringing a bunch of other things to take hold of my holiday with the Lord. What I love about this passage is, and it's not mentioned, God talks about different things in the Deuteronomy passage, but in this passage, he talks about, I made the earth in 6 days, and then I took a Sabbath on the seventh. I love that God never asks us to do something he's not willing to do. He's not just lording it over, saying, I'm going to put all these rules and have this power trip, and it's going to boost my ego. He's saying, no, actually, I've walked what you're walking. And he's gone way farther than we've gone. But he says, I made the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day I rested. I'm sure he didn't have to rest. So when we try and argue like, oh, I don't really need a Sabbath. Well, if God took one, you probably could use one too. But he's gracious enough that he doesn't ask us to do something that he isn't willing to do himself. But if we look at that passage, it starts off by saying, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And it ends by saying, therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy after creation. So I think that's significant. God blessed the Sabbath day. He made it holy. He set it apart. The instruction to us is to keep it holy. He made it holy. We keep it holy. He made it set apart, and he instructs us to keep it set apart as he made it. So we're continuing on what he began. We're not going to turn there, but in Mark 2, there's a couple moments where the Pharisees are trying to pin Jesus with something, an accusation. They're looking for something to hold against him. And Jesus and his disciples are walking through the grain fields, and it's on a Sabbath, and they get hungry, and they begin grabbing some of the kernels and eating them. And the Pharisees are over there like, oh, he's breaking the law. Jesus, their disciples are breaking the law. And Jesus goes, well, haven't you heard about David? There was a point where David and his men were hungry, and they ate the bread, the showbread. There's a moment after that, before Jesus, or after Jesus' response, that they're also on the Sabbath, and a man with a withered hand comes up, and he wants to get healed, and the Pharisees are watching him to see if he heals on the Sabbath. They were looking for something to pin against him. But after Jesus uses this example of David, and what David did with his men in the Old Testament regarding the bread that they ate, he says this in Mark 2:27. It says, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He says the Sabbath was made for man. So God made the Sabbath and blessed it, and we keep it holy. He made it holy, we keep it holy. As we read before, the Sabbath is to the Lord, like we read in Exodus 20, verse 9. The Sabbath is to the Lord, but it's for man, he says. The Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath. So when we Sabbath, we're setting apart a day to the Lord, but what for? For us. Here's the beauty of the Ten Commandments or the law. You look through all the 10 commandments, and every one of them, it's in your best interest to heed God's instruction. He's not after power. All the power is his anyways. He's not after some power trip or some ego or to boost his confidence. When he gives us instruction, he's actually saying, hey, you're setting aside this day for me, but ultimately it's actually you that benefits from it. he delights in it because he wants us. We're his prized possession, the apple of his eye. But he says, man wasn't made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. And then he goes on to say, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So we ask ourselves these questions. How well do we Sabbath? In different parts of my life as well, it would have been not well. If you're like me, it could be not well. But we ask ourselves these questions. Do we take a Sabbath? Or do we take a day off and it's not actually set apart for the Lord, but maybe it's just a day off? Or who's Lord of our Sabbath? Is Jesus the Lord of our Sabbath? Or is our TV the Lord of our Sabbath? Or is our phone the Lord of our Sabbath? Or is social media the Lord of our Sabbath? Or maybe our people-pleasing is the Lord of our Sabbath. All the things that we've said yes to that we shouldn't have said yes to, we should have actually given no's, but in the desire to not disappoint or let people down, we've said yes to all these things that actually steals our ability to set apart a day. And we're going to talk next week that Sabbathing well doesn't just mean you sit in a chair all day and do nothing. There are some very beautiful ways to connect with God in very creative ways out in nature or through art or with your family or sharing a meal, all kinds of things. So again, the point is not that we're adding something on our plate like, oh, I got to do a Sabbath. It's actually the opposite. It's we need to take things off our plate so that we actually have the ability to cease for a day. Set it aside for the Lord in a way that ultimately is for our own well-being. Oftentimes, busyness, in essence, is caused because we've said yes to too many things or yes to the wrong things. Again, with millions of options at our fingertips, we think, oh, I don't have time for that. We're making hundreds of choices a day with our time. Now more than ever, if you say yes to something, it will require, hypothetically, millions of no's. Of all the things you could do, of all the places you could go, of all the things you could pull up on your phone, literally when you say yes to something, it requires millions of no's based off of what you could give your time to. But here's the thing. The solution to being too busy is not more time. Let me say that again. The solution to being too busy is not more time. Think of it this way. If you look at statistics of people who have won the lottery and gone from basically not having much money to a bunch of money, most of them, the vast majority of them, within 5 years are back to where they were. Why? They got money, but it was the habits, it was the lifestyle, it was the principle that won in the long run. So sometimes, if you're like me, you're thinking, oh man, there'll be more time one day. Or things will just slow down, or this will fall off. And then yet somehow, we always spend the time that opens up. I think in the same way, if God were to magically transform the rotation of Earth around the sun into a 48-hour day, we would be just as busy, if not more busy, than we are now. Because we'd shove so many things into it. The solution of the pathological busyness that we're talking about is not magically receiving more time. It's actually using the time that we have wisely. It involves saying yes to the right things and no to the right things as well. You might say yes to a few things, but you're going to say no to several hundred things. 4 years ago, before I moved here, it was about 2 months before I moved. I was hiking one of my favorite mountains in Phoenix. Now let me preface that. If you were to look at my favorite mountain in Phoenix, you would say it's a hill, but for Phoenix, it's a mountain, okay? Get off my back. So I'm hiking my favorite mountain, and it's in the middle of the city, and I love it because the city's all around it, and it reflects light off of the mountain, and when there's this full moon, you don't even need a flashlight. So I'm hiking this mountain. I'm having a great time. I know I'm going to move in 2 months. I've already given my yes to going to Washington. I have no idea about what the things God has in store and the whole lead pastor thing, but from my frame of reference, I was going out to Washington for a year and a half to help out with youth and then come back to Arizona. And I was asking the Lord, I said, what kind of season are you bringing me into? I wasn't pursuing ministry. I was working in the business world. I'd never worked in ministry. I'd served before, but I asked the Lord the question, what kind of season are you bringing me into? Like, what's going to mark this season? What should I know, prepare for, or what is it you're going to be cultivating in me? I'm just curious, like, what's this season going to be about? And the Lord very clearly said, I'm bringing you into a season of rest. And I was like, rest? I've known a few people in ministry, and I've never heard someone use that adjective for ministry. I said, rest, a season of rest. So I kept kind of chewing on it and asking more questions and seeking the Lord. And this is ultimately what the Lord said, is he said, when you're operating in the flow of what I'm doing, even if there's physical exertion, even if there's challenges, even if there's stretching, even if I'm stretching you beyond your capacity or there's steps of faith, even amidst all that, if you're walking and operating in the flow of my Spirit, there will be a deep, unwavering rest inside of you. And I didn't even fully understand how to do that or how to walk in that. I would say I'm just now catching up 4 years later with some of the things God was saying that night. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface, but in the context of us entering into this new season, pursuing Highline High School, there are specific things, and we've been talking about it for several weeks, there are specific things, both corporately and personally, that God is leading us into. He's asking for our yes. But the nature of walking out Scripture and letting our yes be yes and our no be no is that when we give our yes, we have to back it with no's. Because you could give so many yeses that it makes your yes irrelevant. You could give so many yeses that it dilutes your yes to where you're not actually bringing value into any of the places that God's calling you to bring value in. Or you could be stretched so thin that you're not actually growing and being cultivated in the way that God wants to cultivate you in this season, because you might be doing the thing that God's calling you to do, but then you've got 10 other things that prevent you from resting and recovering in a way that he could shape you and mold you and grow you and strengthen you along the way. And as we move into this season, I think it's essential that we as a body know both how to engage in the things God's calling us to engage in, which will be stretching, which will expand our capacity, which will require that we lean on his Spirit and take steps of faith and go places we've never been before, just like an athlete going beyond his physical capacity. But we need to be especially developed in this area of saying, all right, God, I'm going to be pressing in, but I'm also going to have a regular rhythm of ceasing, being still, abiding. And I believe that in those moments, he's shaping us, he's strengthening us, but it actually releases a flow of the Spirit inside of us because we're called to abide constantly, abide in God. Yet you can't abide when you're in a rush. You can't abide when you're in a rush. In fact, some would say that you can't actually truly love when you're in a rush because love is patient. And so if we're going to talk about the whole story or the rest of the story, we're going to be pressing in and going after some things that are going to be challenging, they're going to stretch us, that are going to be an adventure. It might be intense at times, but we need to have the regular rhythm of saying, hey, we're disciplined to stop and to cease, to go before the Lord, to set aside a day to him, which is ultimately for us, that he made it holy and blessed it, but we keep it holy. It's going to be incredibly important for us. Go ahead and stand with me as we close. As we learn to step off that hamster wheel or the rat race of the pathological busyness, we're going to find that we're that much more fruitful and effective in what we do. For myself, as someone who I love the rush, I love doing everything, and I love so many different ideas, and there's so many ideas and passions that I'll never have time in my life to pursue all of them. I just look around at God's green earth, I'm like, man, there's so many things that I would love to study. There's so many industries I'd love to work in. There's so many things that I'd love to understand or be a part of or do. There's so many ministries I would love to help cultivate. there won't be enough time in this life to do all of them. But as we're intentional, as we scale back the busyness, as we step out of that pathological business, I believe that we're actually going to continue to experience an acceleration of the Spirit. Even the ease of heaven we're seeing with Highline right now, it just feels like doors are falling open and invitations are falling open and divine appointments and connections. And we still have to be intentional because there's so many ideas with Highline. But our responsibility is to stay focused on the things that God's saying in the timing that He's saying. But as we are willing to say yes to the things God's saying yes to and no to the things God's saying no to and have time apart with Him, it actually releases this flow of heaven, this flow of the supernatural. Joseph and I, with one of our meetings at Highline, we were blown away because we walked out of it, and Joseph was saying, man, it's amazing when you get your marching orders from the Lord and just see that He's already been way ahead of you. He's been fighting your battles before you ever got there. That's what we step into when we step out of the busyness. The busyness is just us trying in our own strength to get to the next thing. But when we do things the way God has taught us to do and designed us to do, it opens up an ease of heaven, a flow of the supernatural that we couldn't do by just rushing to the next thing. And so now personally, I feel like I'm only scratching the surface of this, but I feel more refreshed. I feel more encouraged. I feel more invigorated by the things that God's doing because I've actually done less. And it's incredible. And it's meant that I've had to cut out things. It's meant that I've had to sacrifice things. I talked about getting addicted to scrolling on YouTube or Instagram. I had Sierra put a lock on my phone so I can't even pull up Instagram or Facebook or YouTube on my phone. I'd love to think that I was disciplined enough to just do it. I tried 100 times to tell myself I was gonna be on there less, and it just doesn't work. So I said, I'm gonna make a way to block it from eating away my time and attention. Sometimes it means we have to actually be aggressive in what we do to protect our time. And I'm gonna end with this. Quote by Dallas Willard: hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Let me say it one more time. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. We aren't ever going to get out of the rat race if we just hope that 2 months from now we'll have more time. Next week, we're going to talk about some very practical ways. How do we actually do this well? I've learned I have to be ruthless with it. Yesterday, I went through and purged all the notifications on my phone. Anything that's not essential, I turned them all off. And then a random notification popped up. I kid you not, it's been popping up. It's like some OfferUp watch list thing. I've been just swiping it off my screen literally for 5 years. And until I got into this mentality of stripping away everything else, imagine how many emails are cluttering up your email. Imagine how many notifications are causing you to touch your for you iPhone users 2,600 times a day. All these notifications. I've had to become ruthless in going, I want less stimulus. I want less things taking my attention. I want less things causing me to pick up my phone. I want less things cluttering up my schedule so that I can be present, so that I can be unhurried, so that I can have margin in my life, so that I can cease and be still with the Lord and get marching orders that allow me to go 10 times as far in the Lord's capacity than my own capacity to rush. So pray with me. God, we desire to grow in this area. Would you come and would you show us collectively, our whole congregation, as we walk on this journey, would you come and just mature us? Would you come and reveal the areas that have just been sucking our time, sucking our attention, sucking our passion, sucking our joy? God, would you give us a boldness to say no to things, to lovingly and graciously say no to things, but give us a boldness to say yes to the right things. Not everything someone asks of us or every need that's out there, but say yes to the right things. Would you teach us in the weeks to come, would you teach us how to Sabbath well? Teach us how to cease, to stop. to be still and know that you're God. We don't want to be the athletes that are just running ourselves into the ground or constantly hurting to the point that injury sets in. We want to run the race and finish the race, where we're operating in that spirit of the Lion of Judah and being bold like that lion to go after it in your strength and in your spirit, but also to have the times where we step back and set apart a day as holy to you with our whole household, our whole family. And that it wouldn't just be a weekly rhythm, it would be also daily in the time that we spend with you in the quiet place. That we'd have healthy rhythms of engaging and then recovering, engaging and recentering, engaging and realigning, engaging and going back and listening for your voice. God, thank you that the burdens aren't on our shoulders. Your yoke is easy and your burden is light. We want to learn to partner with you to go so much farther in your spirit than we could ever go through our own effort or busyness. Teach us how to do that in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys.